Hey, Bob Cooney here with another edition of the Being Virtual Show. I'm really excited about this one. So I love comedy. I hope you love comedy. And we're going to talk to Kyle Render, who's bringing comedy to the metaverse. Kyle, welcome.
Hey, Bob. How's it going, man? How you been?
Oh, dude, so good to have you and to finally get a proper catch up. It's been, I want to say it was like during the teeth of the pandemic when we really talked last, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You were using an application that was kind of like Altspace. You were interviewing Vince from Meow Wolf, and he crashed out.
Oh, wow.
And you brought me on stage as a cartoon.
Yeah, I forgot about that. It was a platform called Room Key.
Yeah,
that was called TEEO or something, and by a guy named Don Stein, who I'd kind of tracked. He did a big Kickstarter crowdfunding thing and raised a bunch of money. And it was right when what was the big one that blew up that I used? That was like the multi-billion-dollar. It was like the first virtual event.
Spatial Engage, and I mean, there's so many.
No, it wasn't VR. It was like like 2D, and they raised a shit ton of money, and it just became Hopin.
Okay.
And Hopin just raised a ton of money, and so Hopin did one of those, and then crashed down, and they sold it out for bits and parts, and that was the whole virtual event space was really hard.
Yeah.
But you guys have a unique angle on the events that you run, and so I'm really looking forward to getting into it with you. Let's start with just your background. Like, how'd you get into comedy?
Oh man, I went through a divorce. That'll do it to anybody.
Yeah.
It was about 2016, going through some hard times. I lived in San Antonio at the time. I went down to the Laugh Out Loud comedy place in San Antonio, Texas, and met my business partner. I had no idea who he was going to be at the time. His name was Big Al Gonzalez. He had just moved to Texas from California. We became really good friends, and he taught me the ropes, and I became a comedian. It's been a lot of fun. It's doesn't pay the bills, Before that, I was in the virtual reality space all the way back to DK2 and the Gear VR. My old company, it was called Level 2. We put out a video game called Deadhead VR. It did so well that Oculus ported it to the Oculus Go and didn't tell me. And then it broke completely because I wasn't able to fix the control scheme. But then quarantine happened, and that's where the next part of the story comes in.
Yeah. So talk about the comedy thing a little bit more. So how did you, why did you first decide you were going to do it? Was it stand up or improv, or did you go through any training? Talk about those early days.
The early days is just a lot of open mics, man. It's a lot of waiting around, waiting for your time, getting to know everybody, kind of going around the circuit, open mic to open mic, drive, wait 2 hours, wait for your 3 minutes of time. It's a grind. It's not meant for everybody. It's pretty rough. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's no money in it. So you're doing it for love of the game, or is it the adrenaline rush when you get up there and people laugh?
It's so many things. The adrenaline rush is huge. Everybody does it for the adrenaline. Some people are just in it for that because a lot of them are actually just completely sober, and that's where they get their high, right, is on stage. It's just a wild ride. A lot of people think they're going to make it to the top. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. In this day and age, unless you're bald and white and your name is Joe or Tom, you may make it.
Yeah, interesting. And so, we're seeing all this stuff on Netflix, and we're seeing comedians, like the definition of comedy is getting a bit confusing, right? Like, what are you allowed to say? What are you not allowed to say? I mean, comedy's historically been kind of a safe space to pretty much say whatever you want. And obviously there've been, Lenny Bruce and some of the early guys, would dance on those tightropes and fall off and get arrested momentarily, but that only added to the legend. Now, we're seeing people get canceled, and some people it's working for, and other people it's not. What's your take on all of this? And the whole nature of comedy right now.
The whole nature of comedy is just politics. It is what it is. It's unfortunate, but you look at the history of things, and a lot of politicians were comedians before they were in charge of anything because they're public speakers. It all comes down to public speaking. And in today's climate in 2024, you can't say a lot of things that you could say back in the day. I mean, you even have people now like Jerry Seinfeld coming out of the woodworks and saying you would never be able to make a Seinfeld today because it touches on so many just little tiny topics of different races and different sexes that just is not appropriate in this day and age and time. After quarantine, a lot of people from California moved over to Austin, Texas, which is where I was born and raised. And it's turned into kind of like an anti-Hollywood, if you will. Joe Rogan opened up his comedy club. Kill Tony podcast, one of the biggest podcasts for comedy now, is at the Mothership. And they go off the walls, and they're bringing comedy back, and they're doing a good job of it, but it's still kind of frowned upon across the world, right? But you got to be able to say what you got to say if you're going to be in this game. So you're going to get canceled. Sometimes it's permanent. Sometimes it's for a day. You'll never know.
Yeah. Interesting. I watch, I don't know if you watch any of Dave Chappelle's stuff, and, he seems to have figured out how to walk that tightrope really well somehow. And I can't necessarily describe how he's done it, but he's kind of embraced the negative feedback he's gotten. And maybe that's part of being a successful comedian now. And you always have to be able to take rejection, right? Like that's part of the gig, I would imagine.
Absolutely. I feel like some people actually only make it after they get canceled. Take Tucker Carlson, for example. After he got dropped from Fox News, now he's one of the biggest anchors out there, and he's just solo. And now he's going to podcasts like Kill Tony and just doing whatever he wants. He's going to Russia and doing all these crazy things because he doesn't have any strings attached to him anymore. And that's essentially what Comedy Central did to Dave Chappelle when they let him go. They said, well, we're not giving you any more money, but the strings are no longer there, right?
Yeah. Fascinating. So, and so one of the things so let's talk about the Failed to Render show and how did it start? And then I'm going to come back to this subject if I can remember. So maybe you can remind me about how performing as an avatar changes how it feels to deliver comedy. So we're going to come back to that being virtual part, but talk a little bit about the Failed to Render show. How did it start and what is it?
Yeah, so it was quarantine. I have a 10-year-old daughter now. At the time, she was 6, and we were quarantined together in the apartment. And I had just gotten a Quest 1, and I hadn't been in VR in a while. And I was like, well, I'm not going outside, and I'm a social butterfly, so I got to get something done here. And so I put on my Quest 1. I went to Altspace, and I went to this party. It was just a house party. People were just drinking, smoking, hanging out, doing whatever they were going to do. And I met this blue robot. And I was like, so what do you do in the real world? He's like, oh, I'm an AC conditioner guy. But in the VR world, I run the best parties in Altspace. And I was like, okay, cool, man. I'm just here for the party. I appreciate it. And he's like, well, what do you do? And I was like, well, I'm a comedian. And he's like, oh, okay. Well, there goes an AirPod. He says, well, do you want to do a comedy set at my house party? I was like, I guess so. I don't see any reason not to. I'm not doing it outside, and neither is anybody else. So I hit up Big Al. I told you about Big Al earlier. He taught me everything about comedy, and I was like, hey, I'm in this headset. I'm telling jokes to the whole world in here. Why don't you come in? And first he came in on a desktop. He told some jokes. He saw the cartoons. They're all laughing. And he said, there's something here. I don't know what it is. So we got an Oculus Go. It only had one controller at the time. And then he had to upgrade to a Quest 1, Quest 2, it goes on forever. But then he really saw the potential of it. And he said, well, I'm from the Bay Area, and I've been in the comedy industry for over 2 decades. Let me hit up some other people. And I was like, okay, cool. And we started spreading the word during quarantine. And before you knew it, we were having a show every week with about 4 different comedians from across America, mostly the Bay Area and California. All putting on their headsets and performing, and it all started in Altspace. It's really crazy how it happened. I mean, you can't even plan this stuff. It was all by sheer coincidence and accident.
And the willingness to say yes to opportunity, right? Like, like that's where the magic happens, is being open. Like you could have easily said, no, sorry, blue weird robot air conditioning guy, I'm gonna don't come in my space, right? Yeah. So
well, it's funny you mentioned that, right? Because the first time you said it to me, I was like, that sounds kind of crazy. And then it was like 2 weeks later, I was still at home and I went back and found the blue robot and I was like, yes, we'll do it.
Yeah,
know,
right. Like
we're going
interesting.
crazy.
Yeah, interesting. And so, we got to say yes to those things that sound crazy, because you just never know what's on the other side of them. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then, man, the story gets absolutely wild. I could go down a wild rabbit hole if you want me to.
That's why we're here. It's why it's a deep dive, man. Let's go.
All right. So I met a guy named Mike Venn. He's the doorman at the Comedy Store in California, one of the biggest comedy clubs in America. Started by Pauly Shore and Mitzi Shore and all of them, all the Shores. And he got me in touch with Scott Shore, who owns the Comedy Store in San Jose. Not the main Comedy Store, but the secondary one. Okay. And he introduced me as the VR guy. And he said, hey, we could bring the Comedy Store into VR. Wouldn't that be so awesome? We should do that. And I was like, yeah, we could do that. So we went and we made a Altspace room that kind of looked like the Comedy Store, a little bit different. And we got a lot of comedians that had performed at the actual Comedy Store before. And we did an entire show. It was like a 1 hour special. We edited it, did all this crazy stuff, and we sent it back to Scott Shore. And then I got a phone call from Scott Shore. And he says, Kyle, are you there? Like, yeah, I'm here. He's like, I got Brian Moses on the phone. And if nobody knows who Brian Moses is, he was the one that actually started the roast battle that Jeff Ross took to Comedy Central. Okay. So he says, Brian, this is Kyle. I want you to meet Kyle. Hey, Brian, Kyle says that he is the VR guy. You said you're the VR guy. So who's the VR guy, Brian? Brian says, I don't got time for this shit, Scott. And he hangs up the phone. He's like, what the hell was that? And I was like, I have no idea. I got so deep in the comedy game, like instantaneously, I had no idea what was going on. And I was like, well, do you want this video file of this pitch or not? And he's like, yeah, send it over. So I send it over. He sends it to his brother as a pitch that we could bring the Comedy Store into VR. And I immediately get a phone call from lawyers. You can't use our branding. Why are you using our branding? You can't use our branding. And I'm like, talk to your brother, because your brother asked for it. Are you insane? So then I went down this rabbit hole of talking to lawyers from the Comedy Store. Long story short, Scott Shore calls me back and he says, you know what? Screw my brother, screw them, screw Pauly, screw everybody. You have your brand. You go out there and do your shit, kid. And I was like, wow. How did I get so far into the mix so fast? It was just insane. Absolutely insane. But I took those words and we made a new comedy club and we just kept going with the brand, man. And it's been going really good.
Yeah. Talk about the name. So Failed to Render, Kyle Render. How did you come up with the name? Because naming is one of the big challenges I see in not just this industry, but all businesses. And yours seems to be, as close to perfect as I can imagine one.
It was all natural. I mean, my last name is Render. It really is. People ask me all the time. It really is. And when I went into Altspace, actually, it was very laggy and my internet wasn't so good. And I kept lagging out. And I thought it'd just be funny to name myself Failed to Render. And whenever the blue robot, Nappy, said, what are we going to call the show? Why don't we just call it Failed to Render? And I was like, I'm okay with that. I mean, it's my name.
Yeah.
And
I love it
today,
too. Go ahead.
But today, it means so much, because when a comedian is on stage and they lag out or their headset dies or whatever happens to them, I always say, he failed to render, he won the show. He won the show. And everyone's like, yeah, and like the bloopers are like the best part of the show,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting because you have to, and maybe this is again inherent in the nature of doing comedy in VR, but look, I can freak out sometimes if I'm doing a live show, especially too, and the tech isn't working and you feel the pressure and you can really succumb to that pressure and not be your authentic. I won't be my authentic self when I'm feeling pressure, right? And you know, and so the ability to embrace those technical challenges. And again, you know, comedy improv, like you're always just kind of dealing with the unknown. So it's yeah. What's it? How do the people that have come in? So are you bringing people into VR as far as the comedians go that you work with? Like, are they experienced with VR, and you're going into that pool, or are you bringing people in that have no idea with it and they're kind of curious? Like, what's the reaction been, and who's your comedian profile right now?
80% of the people that are performing at my club, we actually bring in. I have a booker, I have an IT guy, I've got a whole operating staff, I've got a DJ and all kinds of stuff, bouncers, you name it. And we're actually doing hands-on IT work with them because, like you just said, most comedians have never been in VR and they're all very skeptical. Only the ones with an open mind are like, well, that makes sense. You know, I could do some jokes at home and then I can go out there to the real world and do those jokes again. And I have a training ground to do something like that. The other 20% are people that pretty much just heard about us through mutual friends. If in the comedy industry, if somebody is walking around and they say, oh, have you ever done VR comedy? Most people today would say, oh, you mean Fail to Render? Because it's kind of just like synonymous with that at this time. Which is a great place to be. Our huge profile right now, we worked with Howie Mandel last year. I actually went over to his studio and he's the biggest germaphobe in Hollywood. And I had the pleasure of saying, okay, Howie, I'm gonna put this headset on your head. And that was my #1 customer service moment of my life. Like, okay, Kyle, let's get it done. And I put Howie in it and I muted him because he went in there with his manager and another comic, Elijah Schlesinger, and they were having a good time. And Howie's like, I want to talk to the comedian on stage. How do I do that? I'm like, well, you're muted. I muted you. So click the red button. And he says, I'm colorblind. I'm like, oh, shit. Does anybody even know that? So he figured it out. And I was smart enough to put the comedy show on during when he was in there with a comedian he had met in real life. And then on the little teleprompter, I put a picture of him and Mateen Stewart up there. So he's like, Mateen, I know you. I know you. And they had this amazing back and forth situation. And that was awesome. And then right after that, we worked with Kenan Thompson. And we did a little show where he went around America trying to find comedians for his show. And we utilized the proto-hologram machine. We had used it a few times before. It's just a big hologram box made by a guy named David and Howie in Hollywood. And we essentially hooked up Altspace to this box. So we had comedians wearing headsets with their avatars in the hologram box at the same time. And we did about 8 of those shows. And then we started doing the ones with Kenan as well. So we started blending those realities. And I really think that that's the key to the future of the success of stand-up comedy in the metaverse, is blending the realities. So everyone that's skeptical is like, wow, this is insane. What's going on?
Yeah, interesting. So let's talk about that. So proto-hologram, David Nussbaum, I didn't realize, is Howie Mandel a partner in that business?
He sure is. Yep.
Yeah, that explains why he was doing some of the early demos. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so talk about, and we talked about this a couple of years ago. You tried to explain it to me, and I'm not sure I actually got it.
Okay.
So for those of you that don't know, the proto-hologram is like a life-size box, and it used some special effects tricks to make it look like somebody is live in the box, and you can use a camera setup with a green screen. And it puts that person in, and it gets this real sense of depth and reality. And it's similar to Google's got some technology. It's kind of virtual telepresence technology, which we're seeing more and more and more. I think the Google one is called Star something. And so you had one in a live club, and you had performers in VR, and you had a live audience in the room in real life.
Yep.
And you could see the avatar of the person in the hologram box. Where were the performers in real life?
On the stage with a headset on.
So a performer's on the stage wearing a headset. There's a box next to them so they could see the avatar. So the audience didn't have to wear headsets.
Correct.
To see it. Yeah, wow.
And then we had a gigantic projector on the back wall that showed the audience in VR. And then in VR, we had a camera that showed the real life audience. So there was a window. There was a window between the worlds that the audiences could see each other and what they were doing in each world simultaneously.
And could the performer see the audience also? Because that's one of the challenges I have found.
They could see it in VR. They could see the audience in VR. So
did they see the video cameras feed or just the virtual audience?
Just the virtual audience. So then you have some comedians that are like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. I have to make sure the people in front of me are happy too. So they put up their headset a little bit when they hit a punchline and look around and be like, I'm a human, right? But we did so many of these hybrid shows that every single time I would do it a different way. And the last one we did was the most successful. Just picture this, 4 comedians and a host. Everybody goes up there and does 5 minutes in the real world. Simultaneously in VR, you're watching the stream, but you know that they're all going to come in as VR comedians, okay? So the first part of the show is done. It's about 40 minutes. There's a wrap, and then all the comedians go to the back. They all put on their headsets, and now you see the same comedians in the proto-hologram box doing a completely different 5 minutes. So all the people in the real-life audience are like, oh, isn't that Corey? Isn't that Tommy? I just saw that guy. He looks like him. That's the cartoon. Right? So the real life audience is happy because they already saw the real person. And then in VR, they're happy because they're like, yeah, we're a part of the show too, and we're not even there, you know?
And is that the model that you think for now you're kind of going to roll with?
It's the easiest way. It's the best of both worlds. The people at home are patient. The people in the real world are not. They're not as patient in the real world. If they see us up there with 5 different technologies they don't understand, they can't even hear our jokes. So it made the most sense. And I think that it's the most, profitable, and people will like that the most. We did about 5 of them. Yeah.
And so, Leah, let's talk about profit. So what's I'm a business model guy. I'm always looking for how do people make money using this technology? How do you, what business model? And again, obviously this has been really experimental and emergent on your part, which I'm a huge fan of. I think that's how you get the best outcomes. What have your learnings been, and what do you think the model is going to be? And obviously you're still doing it. So you think there's a way to make money doing this. What's your,
it's a show. It has to be a show at first. Right. And it's all about going across to different comedy clubs and seeing who's open-minded to it. There's not always going to be a proto-hologram. It's a lot of money to send those things across the world. Yeah. So we've done a lot of things up in Maryland and Baltimore where we just had a projector, and that was okay because we had a real-life host and the headliner would be there. But then we would put some people from across the world and say, this person's in Italy, this person's in Australia, this guy's in Florida, and they're all performing for you, and they see you. So they really understood that at least there's a real person hosting, and at the end, there's a headliner that's going to be there, and maybe they'll do a little VR too. But it's really about mixing the platforms together. Now, in the long run, when I talk to investors, there is no other route other than a hybrid comedy club. 100%. It has to be that. And honestly, I have to lean towards the anime community, the nerds, the people that are really open to the idea. I'm a nerd, you know what I mean? That are open to the idea of experimental. Experimental is not going to be a thing in this field for another 10 years, and we're so early. We got so lucky to do what we did so far, and that's why I still think that it's a little ways off, right? But imagine I just take a camera crew to Jerry Seinfeld's house, and now he's performing in my hybrid comedy club to just 100 people, and now you save Jerry Seinfeld the travel, the food, and knock down his price a little bit, right? And then you have a comedy club in Texas, California, Florida, New York, and he's being simulcasted to all these comedy clubs at the same time. And then every once in a while, he'll have about 4 TVs in front of him. During quarantine, there was, I think it was America's Funniest Videos, or maybe American Got Talent or something, But when people would perform, there were 100 different screens up there of Zoom calls and people in different areas of the world. So it wouldn't be that hard to put a bunch of screens in front of a comedian that says Florida, Texas, Arkansas, Nebraska. It doesn't matter where they are, because then the comedian can do crowd work and be like, hey, Nebraska, you sitting there on your couch with a red shirt, what are you doing? You're too drunk. You can just say anything you want, but the comedian would still be a part of the crowd work, because you can't perform to nobody. You can't pre-record it. There has to be chemistry, or there's nothing to go off of.
Yeah, no,
So
I've experienced that myself as a speaker. Like I did some early keynotes in like Verbella and some of those platforms, and it's like shouting into a cave. Like there's no audience feedback at all, and so it's really, really hard to get that energy. And it was just one of the weirdest public performance experiences I've ever had. And I don't do them anymore, because I find them creepy and weird and not rewarding. Like you don't get the, part of, like you said, as a speaker is, you get that dopamine rush, and you get the connection from the audience, and you feed off of that. And yeah, it's I find it weird.
So we've created a community over all these years that we have a tone of respect. Whenever you come into the Failed Renter Comedy Club, you're there for a show. So there's really no heckling, and we encourage everybody to unmute themselves, because we want that feedback. They need that feedback. They want to know if they did good. Yeah. We record every single show so we can send it back to the comedian to say, here are your new jokes. We hope you enjoyed your time here. And honestly, right now it's a training ground, and it's fantastic. I mean, again, I'm a stay-at-home dad. I got a 10-year-old daughter. I don't get out a lot. And I've gotten more stage time than everybody I know combined, because I perform 5 nights a week, and I'm hosting shows 5 nights a week. And that's just something unfathomable in the comedy industry, because going back to when I first started comedy, you got to drive around. You got to wait your 2 hours. You do 3 minutes. Maybe you're going to kill it. Maybe you're going to bomb. Who knows? But compared to just buying a $300, $500 headset at home and getting the same or more amount of stage time, is just, there's nothing like it. There really isn't.
And so the shows that you're doing now 5 nights a week, are they scheduled? Are they random? Is it just you doing stuff in VR with a VR audience? How are you getting that frequency?
So we have 2 book shows, Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then the Monday, Wednesday, Friday are all open mics. We have hosts, really good hosts that host those open mics like a real show. You sign up, you go up, there's a light, don't run the light, we'll mute you and boot you. It's like a real comedy club. But we have them every single night at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time across the board, Monday through Friday. We're in the Horizon Worlds, Metaverse, and we're in VRChat. We're no more all eggs in one basket after Altspace is what I'm trying to say.
And so do you alternate between the two, or are you doing them both simultaneously? Okay.
We alternate Monday, Tuesday, Horizon, the rest of the week VRChat.
And which one's working better for you, and why?
So that's an interesting question, because in Horizons, your avatar humans like The Sims. So the laughter is better. The connection in VR is better. It feels like you're there more often. But the social media of posting that content does not do well. It doesn't. No one wants to see those avatars, unfortunately, right? VR chat, the lag is a little bit more. You're going to have some dogs and cats and anime characters in the audience. So comics, if they're good with crowd work, they'll kill it. If you're not good with crowd work, it's like, what am I doing? This is crazy, right? But then on the opposite side of that, if you're posting VR chat content on social media, it kills.
Why?
So where's it going to go? I don't know, but they both have their own shtick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So do you think it's just blowback over the, I don't want to live in the metaverse with no legs stuff from Zuckerberg, on that people just reject the content right now from Horizons?
I think that it's very strange how much they're pushing the metaverse, but the algorithm of their platforms aren't pushing it. Why would you not want to push the avatars that you can put little GIFs and stickers all over Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp, but not push the content from Horizon?
Yeah, it's really interesting. They've been terrible at marketing their own shit forever. Like, they're really a great platform for advertisers, but as far as their ability to then use that platform, they need to hire some Upwork kids from Bangladesh that know how to do that.
But I don't think they're going to have to do marketing for Horizon ever. You know why? Because they're just going to shove it down your throat. You don't have to like it. You have a Facebook. You never wanted one. You have one now. It's going to be the same thing, right? Now they're saying Horizon World Operating System. They're giving it away to Asus, Lenovo, and Microsoft, and they're going to be the hardware guys in 5 years. And then Horizon OS is going to be the new Windows. When you go to a Best Buy and buy a computer, what's on it? Windows.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have to like it. You just learn to live with it. So they don't need to market it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. So let's go. So you hit on the avatar thing, and so I moderated a bit of a discussion at a conference in Belgium a few years ago called Stereopsia, and one of the women on there, I think her name's Kathleen Smooze. She's a sexologist, and she does work around kind of sexual liberation and stuff like that in VR. And she talked about how being an avatar can really liberate people. And there's research now that shows that Gen Z, the younger generations, really use avatars as a form of expression. And they feel like it's a part of themselves coming out, not necessarily a replacement for who they are. And so So as a comedian, as a performer, what's it like being an avatar and performing, and how does it feel differently than just being on stage?
Being on stage, you're going to get 100% of the adrenaline. 100%. In VR, it's 50%. You're still going to get the adrenaline. You're going to know if you're doing well or not. That's the key difference there. And yeah, I'm a big guy, right? And when I go into VR, I don't have to acknowledge that I'm a big guy. I don't have to have fat jokes or anything like that. I can just tell you my jokes. And in VR, you actually have to be funny. You can't rely on all this. You can't do all these motions or lay down on the ground or hit yourself with something. It has to be funny. And not only that, you're across the world when you're in VR. You're not in Austin, Texas, or Thailand. You're across the world when you're performing. Every single one of our shows, we have people from the UK, Canada, Mexico, everywhere, all across America. So your jokes have to be funny everywhere, which is a very unique thing that most people are not used to when they're doing stand-up comedy. A lot of people that come in there are just like telling Philly jokes, and it's like, no one's from Philly in here, man. Get your local jokes out of here, right? Yeah. But then you were talking about liberation, right? We've done a lot of stand-up comedy classes in VR, and a lot of people have started performing comedy in our club that never even thought of it. And now a lot of those people said, I love this, and I'm going to take what I learned, and I'm going to go out to the real world and do it. And they have been. A good friend of mine, her name is Eppolite. She lives up in Philadelphia. And Big Al and I taught her how to do comedy in VR. And now she's killing it up in Philadelphia. And now she's bringing a bunch of comedians into VR. So it's like a big circle of life situation there, right? And she's trans. And she never knew she was going to do comedy in the real world until us. And then the only other story there with the stand-up comedy class is there was a guy named Roberto Anelli. He was in Italy, and he woke up every Monday morning at 4 a.m. in his boxers, put on his Quest 2, and he learned how to do comedy in Italy. And now he's the funniest comedian in Italy. He's in all the newspapers, and his Instagram is blowing up because he learned how to do comedy in VR.
And so what is it about VR that you think allows, that it empowers these people to try something that they haven't been able to or been willing to try before?
There's no politics, there's no racism, and nobody judges each other. That's the biggest thing.
Is that the community, you think? Or is that the nature of the technology? No. Is that the community that you've built around the Fail to Render show? Or is that...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It's all inclusive. The only rules in there, don't be racist. Don't be a bigot. You know, no one's got time for that. But other than that, you can be whatever the hell you want to be.
And how did you build that? And so how did you build that sensibility into the community? Because, you know, people talk about building community, but I think, you know, what I've found and studied is that, you know, you can try to nurture a community, but you can't really build it. And so what did you have to do to get that kind of ethos instilled to where it actually is sustainable?
I honestly, I don't think I have the best answer, but I have the most logical answer from what we've been doing is we've been bringing reality into the virtual space. We treat our space like a real brick and mortar comedy club. It's all inclusive, but it's also just worldwide. So there's nothing like it. It's really hard to describe in words unless you've actually been inside, gone to a show, and experienced laughing with people across the world at a comedian 1,000 miles away from you. And it's just, I really wish I had a better answer other than just putting in the time. It's a lot of time, man. We put in so much time. We have so many comedians. We've had over 1,000 now, probably about 5,000 shows. You know,
Wow.
it's just.
So, but you hear these stories all the time, and anybody that's done, you know, enough, you know, Horizons or Altspace or VRChat have had experiences where, you know, people get up in their space and there's all this concern around, you know, around people just being assholes because there's an anonymity to VR that you don't get in the real world. And so how have you taken an environment that's inherently anonymous and instill, because I think there's real lessons to learn here for anybody watching that's thinking about, you know, building community or building virtual worlds. Like, how have you been able to instill that? Like, is it just preach it over and over and over again, or do you kick people out? Like, what do you do?
We have a 3-step system. So thank you for narrowing that down, right? We have a few security people, they're undercover, they're just laughing with everybody else. And if somebody's dog is barking, we'll send them a message and we'll say, hey, your dog is barking. We're going to mute you real quick. You know, go ahead and unmute again when your dog isn't barking, right? If it's a heckler, you're going to mute them and say, hey, no heckling. It's not a part of the show, you know, unless the comic is cool with it. Sometimes they are. But, you know, if you're a nuisance, the third time you unmute yourself and you're still being an ass, well, then you're going to get kicked out. And then you're kicked out, right? But you can still come back. And then if you come back after you got kicked and you're still an ass, then you're banned, right? So you have to have a process of elimination of who's drunk in the audience at a real life comedy club. And should you have any more drinks? No, you shouldn't. We'll see you later, right?
Yeah.
So it comes back to the brick and mortar of there's actually a bouncer when you walk in that greets you and says, hey, welcome to the Failed Renter Comedy Club. And you're like, oh, shit, I'm here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is harder to do at scale when you're talking about a virtual world with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. We're going to have some AI tools develop, which I'm sure they're working on to be able to manage that. There's some real toxicity in things like CS:GO and online gaming, and that we have to figure out how to slay before we really scale any kind of, you know, virtual world for humanity.
Well, I come from a customer service background. I've been a manager of retail, restaurants, you name it, call centers, and it all comes down to customer service and being a human. So what you just said, I actually don't buy, because you really want someone to say, hey, welcome, I'm a real person, and I want you to have fun. Because for the same reason that AI won't take over customer service, AI will never take over comedy, because it's a humane thing that you and I share. We won't laugh at robots, right? And we won't agree with an AI telling us what to do. So it's a really fine line of how do you scale something like this and not rely on AI. Now with a Counter-Strike game, of course, you're going to have AI. But for instance, like VRChat, our biggest show, we had roughly 800 people, and that's 80 people per instance. So then you have to have 2 to 4 moderators in every single instance, individually walking up to people and saying, you're causing a disturbance for the show, please stop.
So that ratio is like 5 to 10 to 1 of bouncers to
right
to people.
right
Yeah, that's
One
not
out
a
of
great
10
sign.
people will act
That's
up.
not a great sign for humanity, Kyle. I don't know.
I'm not going to disagree with you.
Wow. So so if you're, some entrepreneur has some crazy idea, and well, let's talk before we get to that. Let's talk about like the business model. Like, what do you've been doing this a long time, and do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? Are you going to get rich doing this? Are you going to be able to make money? You're talking to investors. What's the business model around this, and what's the next step?
The business model around it has to be the comedy club, the hybrid comedy club with a physical space. And during the day, that can just be an arcade or a bar or something like that. And at nighttime, it can turn into the hybrid comedy club. It has to be that way. And then all of the comedy clubs turn into hubs. They all have VR headsets. You bring in talent. They perform to all of the comedy clubs at the same time. Or you take remote film crews to big comedians' houses and stream them into those comedy clubs. There's really no other way at this time. Talking to investors about something like this, I could tell you what would be awesome in 10 years, that I would love to just put Jerry Seinfeld in all of your living rooms as a hologram, but that's not realistic right now. What's realistic is a brick and mortar showing people the future while embracing it.
Yeah.
Ticket sales are a thing, and we sell tickets, and we have ticketed shows for comedians to come in. All the comedians get paid at my show. All the headliners, the hosts, everyone's getting paid. I got a Patreon. It's like anything else in VRChat or the metaverse or VR. You got to rely on gifts and giving. And a lot of people just help us out and give me money to distribute between the comedians. But as a big term business model, it's going to be a brick and mortar. Some investors say, what about a comedy app? What about a VR comedy app? And no, you know why? Because it's not a comedy show without a host. And there's no such thing as a 24/7 comedy club. How are you going to make money in the application when it's closed 20 hours a day? You're not going to be able to. It's the same reason that Horizons and VRChat is struggling with content, because they don't have enough talent to fill the gaps for a 24/7 TV show.
Yep.
Not going to happen.
And one of the challenges online is, I've done a few of these live, and we're recording this one, and I feel like the live streaming television is just like a dinosaur, right? Like, people are so used to watching online content when they want, on demand. They've time shift and they place shift. Forcing people to show up at a certain time, unless you're giving away something of huge value, and the only way to do it is to be there in that time, it's really tough to do. And so I see your point really well made.
Thank you. Yeah.
And so the model for the club, you've mentioned at an arcade, obviously there's arcades out there are, continue to try to find their business model, and they're footing. That model is still kind of evolving. Have you done anything in arcades? And if so, how's it worked, and what have you learned?
I know you and I were talking about like the Evo Entertainment Arcade and how they have a lot of theaters in there that are empty. And at this juncture, it's definitely a route that I would want to look at, right? We've done some pop-up shows at arcades, and they always do well because nerds love comedy. And the people that love comedy will always find comedy, right? And now Austin, like I said, has turned into this anti-Hollywood comedy industry. Used to be the biggest hippie music capital of the world. Not anymore. There's 30 comedy clubs downtown in Austin, Texas.
Wow.
So when I talk to these investors, I'm talking about San Marcos, because San Marcos is a college town in between Austin and San Antonio, and they're putting a gigantic Hollywood studio there in a college town, and there's no comedy clubs. And it's right in the middle. It's like a Dallas-Fort Worth type situation. It's going to be a huge metropolis, and it's right in the middle.
So you want to build, version 1 of the failed to render comedy club, and then you distribute that content globally through some hybrid VR live show, not necessarily doing different pop-up events
Right. It's not sustainable, especially with the technology we want to use with a proto-hologram, $1,000 headsets, PCs, upkeep, repair, all the damages. It's just not, it has to be localized. It has to be. Yeah.
Okay. And so, how do you feel about the metaverse? Like, let's talk about, so that's step one, right? Now, do you believe that at some point, and if so, when does VR, it's always 5 years away, it's always 5 years away, it's always 5 years away.
Always.
Do we ever stop being 5 years away and where people all of a sudden are using a virtual reality headset in their day-to-day life for certain things? It doesn't have to be the mobile phone. I don't think it'll be the mobile phone replacement necessarily. I do think it might be a laptop replacement before that happens. But how do you see VR being used, and is it going to become a normal thing that most people use at some point?
I mean, I have to just say what I always say to my company is, whenever these are on your AT&T plan and you're paying for it every month, it's not going to go anywhere until it is. No one's going to go out there and buy these $4,000 Apple VR headsets. It's just not happening. It's got to be something you pay off on your phone bill. It's Bluetooth. It's no different than the Ray-Ban glasses that I've got. They're good. They're great. It's not there, but it will be. And honestly, I think it may be a mobile replacement, because we can already do the finger tracking on all these headsets. The finger tracking is really good on every headset. Even the Quest 3 is almost as good as the Apple Vision Pro. But it's just the software. It's all software. The hardware is getting there, but even when that happens, where's the software and how's it going to work? Everyone's going to make fun of it until it's forced down your throat. AT&T had a really good idea early on. They were selling those Gear VRs with the Note 4s. Every time you get a Note 4 at AT&T, they give you a Gear VR headset and say, try this out. Just plug in your phone and you can try VR. And they just let it go. I'm not too sure why, but it was smart. Maybe Samsung. I guess it was Samsung, right?
It was Samsung. Yeah, it was Samsung. And again, I just don't think it was VR. It was more for 360 video, and the customer experience wasn't amazing, right? Like, there was no controller, and it was just like I think we've forgotten how bad. Yeah. I think we forgot how bad those things really were. We romanticize. It's like vinyl, not quite there yet. And so, look, have you used that? What's the platform? Immersed. Have you tried that yet?
I have not tried Immersed. No.
So one of the things, check out Immersed VR. It's an application. You can run it on your computer, and it gives you, it's kind of like the virtual desktop. So you get multiple monitors and stuff like that. I think I'd love you to find that, and then let me know what you think about, because I actually think that VR is a killer app for productivity when you're working on a laptop. Like, I'm a nomad, right? I got a freaking 13-inch MacBook Pro, and sometimes that's just not enough real estate, and the ability to put on my headset and work with 5 monitors, right? Especially if you're doing creative work, it's pretty damn compelling. And there's a company called Visor. Immersive's coming out with a product called Visor, which is a unique headset. It's built by Lenovo.
I've seen that. Yeah, that looks cool.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. We'll see. As the hardware, I agree with you. I haven't bought an Apple Vision Pro. I can't swallow the price tag, and I'm an Apple fanboy, and I'm a bleeding edge tech guy, and I just can't. I did the demo, and I really want one, but I just don't think it's there yet, and I can't swallow the price tag.
I went into the Apple store. They give you 30 minutes. I put it on. I look around. I'm like, wow, the pass through is amazing. That's great. And then I'm like, calculator, clock, calendar. Huh. Super Mario trailer. Yeah, it's over. And then I look at her. I'm like, is that it? And she's like, yeah, that's it. I was like, okay.
I think they've blown the demo, dude. I think Apple's a great marketing company, but they've blown the demo. Like, it's like, let me bring my laptop, let me open my laptop, and then have my laptop show up in VR. And all of a sudden I'm like, holy shit, I've done that demo for people with Immersed, and they're just like, oh fuck, I see it. Right. And they're like, how do I get this? And so I think they're they're starting to get feedback from their employees now about the demo. And my guess is you'll see the demo change in the next couple of months.
Well, it's so crazy too. You'd think they would kill it because Meta has no customer service, zero, right?
Yeah.
And then Apple has the best customer service, but they still somehow botch that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
Well, look, we're used to seeing Apple be so polished and buttoned up in everything they do. But the reality is this is a new market and we don't know how it works. And you're experiencing that yourself in your business, right? You're having to try things and change it and try and learn and iterate. And I think they're doing that. And I don't know if they're doing that intentionally. I think my guess is they learned a lot from their Apple Watch experience. Like they went into it thinking it was one thing and it turned out to be another thing. And I wonder how much of them they embedded that learning and said, okay, we've got this new thing. It's a new category. We don't actually know what the use cases are going to be. We've got 15 potential ones. Let's just go out there and see what we learn and dial it in and get it right. And it was really the Apple Watch 4 where that thing really started taking off. Right. And so I think,
well, that's also when you could put it on your AT&T plan, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Fair enough. I'm telling you. Yeah.
Fair enough. So where do you think we're going? So you actually don't believe in the metaverse hype, it sounds like. Is that a fair statement?
It's fair. Yeah, it's fair.
Yeah. Where do you think, so with all this investment in virtual reality that's happening, right? Big companies spending tens of billions of dollars on R&D, bringing out headsets and Horizon OS and Apple and now Google, Samsung are going to do something, or Google, Samsung, Qualcomm are going to do something. Where do you think the industry's headed? Where, obviously smart glasses are a design goal. I think we'll see if the optics get any closer. I do think we're still a ways away from having technology on optics. Right. To make it a lightweight wearable. Where do you think the VR industry is headed?
I think that I'd hate to go down this rabbit hole, but I will. And I forget what company said it or who said it, but it's like, you'll own nothing and you'll like it. When you walk into an apartment, you're not going to have anything on the walls. Everything is going to be digital assets on the walls. When your friend comes into your house, they're going to connect their glasses to your Wi-Fi. And your entire house is going to be customized with all the stuff that you bought, all the video games, all the music, all the wall art, everything besides a bed and a table is basically going to live on your head. And the billboards in the real world are all going to be in your headset, all the advertising. You're going to drive your car with it. You're going to answer your phone calls with it. And, you have two opposite ends of the spectrum here. You got Meta, who wants to put it on your face, and you got Elon, who wants to put it in your brain. So it's like, who's going to win that battle, right? But it's really going to come down to that.
It feels like that's a sequencing event. It's not going to be one versus the other, and you choose the glasses or the brain implant. I have a feeling I'm not sure I'll live to see the brain implant at mass scale, but there certainly will be. There's a great book I've mentioned before called Oath of Fealty by Larry Purnell and Jerry Niven, or Jerry Purnell and Larry Niven. Science fiction writers, and it's about this Neom in LA. Basically, you follow what's happening in Saudi Arabia with Neom. They predicted that happening in LA, and it's this giant building, and the haves and the have-nots, and the haves have the implant and access to the computer, and the have-nots don't, and how that plays out in society. And it's a fascinating book.
It's a little Ready Player One-esque, Yeah,
it was back in the 70s or 80s. Actually, I read that when I was in high school. I found it fascinating. So
I'm a huge Ready Player One fan, man. So I couldn't wish for more. If the dystopian happens, please lock me in a room, put me in a video game. I'll be fine.
So you're okay with that? So personally, you're okay with that future? You're just skeptical about?
Oh, if the end of the world happens, it's okay if we have that technology, right?
Yeah.
I would much continue real life. But if real life ceases to exist, at least we have something to, hide in a bunker, and it's okay because we're still connected as a society.
Yeah. So one of the things I've said is that I believe, I don't know if you've watched some of the, and this is another thing that they don't do in the Apple demo, which I think is the killer app, is and maybe because it was too early and it was beta or whatever, but the personas that you get in FaceTime, and they've already upgraded them massively.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the reviews that I've seen of people are like, wow, this is actually better than I expected it to be. That virtual telepresence that you get with the proto, which is really kind of one way, and very expensive. Talk about an expensive use case, right? Those are tens of thousands of dollars, and you got to move them around. $60,000, right? So now for $3,500, it's pretty freaking cheap as a replacement for that. What's your take on virtual telepresence? You're an early adopter of that with Proto, and how do you feel like that plays out in our society?
That's a good question. I mean, it's just it's a lot of what we've talked about already, but on top of that, it's a phone call, man. It's a Zoom. When you see these holograms on TikTok, a lot of people are just like, I don't get it. It's a Zoom call, right? And it really has to come down to you experiencing it as a human, and you can't just go off of social media all the time. Sure, presence looks great. It looks cool. The hologram looks like a Zoom TV show, or the failed dreamer comedy show doesn't seem real until you're on the inside. And it's really no different than when I first bought my iPhone. It had a touchscreen and said, holy shit. And all my friends wanted to touch it, and they immediately bought one. But we're so connected as a society and social media now that we don't know what to believe anymore, because it's just so scatterbrained. My dad always tells me when I talk about this VR stuff, he says, back in my day, there was a bellboy with a newspaper, and the newspaper was written 3 days ago, and you take it home. And now it's just like, news. So, but with virtual presence, right? What if it goes down a rabbit hole that's even worse, of people just coming into your zone because you have your house open to virtual telepresence and didn't ask for it, or the hacking, or how there's waves all over from the Wi-Fi that you're hacking into, and I see you where you are in your house all the time. Like, it's just getting crazy, dude.
Right now, I have a really high confidence level that you're you. Did you see the interview that Reid Hoffman did with his AI self recently that's been circulating on LinkedIn?
I saw a little bit of that, yeah.
Right. And so,
Creepy.
And you could tell it was a little creepy, and there was some pausing, and because it was side-by-side comparison, but we are literally days away from not being able to tell who's real and who's not. So not what's real and what's not, because we're already in that world now. Like, we have no idea what to believe. Right. But we're literally on the cusp of not knowing who is real. And I'm just curious, like, do you think about that, and what do you think about it, and how does that play into your thing about keeping this club grounded in some sort of physical reality?
You're never going to get rid of trolls, Bob. Trolls are just a part of human society, and bad actors. I heard about a guy that his Oculus Quest was hacked, and he was in his menu of the Oculus Quest, but really it was somebody else controlling the Oculus and was basically seeing everything that he did inside of his headset and was able to manipulate it. Take that to a new level. You're in your headset and someone else is watching through your eyeballs at what you're doing, right? And not only do I not know if you're real, but now you're seeing what I'm seeing and controlling what I'm doing. Yeah. And it's a part of my persona too. Like, the rabbit hole goes so deep. And I don't know how we're going to regulate AI. I have no idea. It's not up to me. It's scary as shit, but I guarantee you that I'll make sure I meet these comedians in person once the AI takes over, before I put a headset on them and says, do time. It also confuses me that a lot of people are creating AIs of themselves when they're still alive. Isn't that something you would want to prepare for when you're dead? Like, hey, I died, here's my AI.
That's going to happen. I think it's all experimental, and people are curious about it. And look, if you want to know more, my last show was with Louis Rosenberg, and we did a deep dive onto AI and VR and some of the risks of those things coming together. So that was a really good segue to my last show, which I don't know if you can do a backwards segue. Is there a word for that? A reverse segue?
Yeah, reverse segue. You got it.
Reverse segue. All right, there we go.
Yeah,
so I learned a new term today.
So
I've always wanted to do stand-up comedy. I actually think I'm a funny motherfucker. I
You
love
curse a
making,
lot.
I do. I love making people laugh, but I'm terrified, to be honest with you. And so maybe that's, VR's the place to practice it. I've been writing a comedy skit for 35 years. I don't know that it's 3 minutes yet, but I'm still working.
Well, you better get it done, man.
Yeah, I know. So, well, Kyle, thanks so much for doing this. Thanks for keeping it real in the real world too. I think
betcha.
There is I talk a lot about the metaverse, but there is a real, need to stay human and stay grounded in some form of this existing reality as we start to explore the new ones that are being built around us. So,
Absolutely.
And we'll see you at the AWE show. You're going to be doing a panel at AWE. Give me a quick 30-second promo of the panel. What can people expect?
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the things we talked about, the history of failed surrender. We're going to put together a huge 5-minute reel. We're going to get a comedian on stage just to do a quick 5 minutes at the end of it, so they actually see a comedy show after we talk about the history. I'm going to have my partner Kaz and Kirsten on stage with me. Kaz built a lot of our clubs, and Kirsten is my business partner in life. And it's just been a great journey. And it's my first time being a speaker. And now I'm going to colleges and doing speaks and doing education for the metaverse and VR. So I also see a road down that path where I can teach a lot of people a lot of cool things about the future of connecting over virtual reality. So
yeah, amazing. Well, keep up the good work. I look forward to seeing you at AWE. How do people find the Fail to Render show?
FailedToRender.com, baby.
All right, and that'll take them to Horizon Worlds or
Discord, Horizon Worlds, VR chat, my personal DMs, my phone number, my social, everything.
Awesome. FailedToRender.com. Kyle Render, thanks for everything you do. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And good luck, because I know you're never actually there. You just keep plugging away. And
you betcha.
And I'm looking forward to performing on your show when I get the balls.
You better get those balls, man. I'll see you soon.
All right, buddy.
All right,
thanks, man.
See you later.
That's it for this version of the Being Virtual show. Stay tuned for more with the innovators and the trailblazers of virtual reality and the metaverse, where we go deep and we learn about what they're doing, where they're going, and how all of this stuff is really going to start impacting us as individuals and as a society. I'm Bob Cooney. BeingVirtual.tv is the website where you can get all the back episodes. It's also on YouTube and LinkedIn and pretty much anywhere else you'll find me.